Deep in a forgotten mountain village, there stands an ancient statue no one dares to touch. They say anyone who lays a hand on it will slowly lose their face, their voice, and their soul. This is the terrifying true horror story of a man who ignored the warning and awakened something that should have remained buried forever. Not every statue worshipped in ancient shrines is made for people to pray for blessings. There are things carved not to be worshipped, but to be imprisoned. And there are warnings passed down from one generation to the next that are not superstition, nor tricks to scare children at night. They are the final strands binding a calamity to where it belongs. It only takes one fool, one curious person, or simply someone who thinks they are braver than everyone else to step forward and reach out, and everything will begin again. This story happened in a remote mountain region in the north, where the fog was so thick that on some mornings people opened their doors and felt as though the whole world had disappeared. The village lay sunken between dark gray limestone ridges, far from the main highway, far from phone signal, far from everything that made modern people feel safe. It had no name on any tourist map. In the stories whispered by timber traders, forest wanderers, and smugglers, it was called by a short, cold name: Blind Village. People called it that because clouds hung low there all year. The mist so dense that even when the sun rose it looked like a pale white smear caught behind a curtain of water. But those who had entered and come back out, if they came back out at all said that the most terrifying blindness there was not outside in the weather, but in the buried history of that village. Something had existed there for a very long time, longer than the memory of the living, longer than the wooden houses now rotting away, longer than the cemetery on the hillside where the gravestones bore no names. Min came to the village because of an anonymous message. He was a freelance journalist specializing in strange phenomena, mysterious disappearances, local legends, and incidents the mainstream press usually avoided touching. Some said Min was reckless. Some said he made money from other people's fear. Others thought he simply fabricated stories with a bit of writing skill and a few photographs edited to look gloomier than they really were. Min did not care. He knew what readers liked: true stories, cursed places, warnings so ominous that people wanted to click the title the moment they saw it. That night, while sitting in his tiny rented room in Hanoi editing an unfinished piece about an abandoned house, Min received a message from an unknown number. It contained only one line: "If you want to see something that should not exist, go to Blind Village. In the stone shrine at the end of the village there is a statue. You may look, do not touch." There was no sender's name, no explanation, nothing else except a pinned location on a map, so faint it looked as though someone had dropped it at random into a blank white mountain region. Min stared at the message for a long time. He had seen many lures like that before. Most were pranks by boys who enjoyed frightening strangers, and the rest were stories exaggerated from local fear. But something in that message kept him from dismissing it. The wording was too brief, too matter-of-fact. Unlike someone deliberately trying to scare anyone, it felt like a reminder, a dry warning, the kind of sentence people only utter after growing exhausted from repeating it too many times. 2 days later, Min set out. The coach dropped him at a poor little town at the foot of the mountain when the sky was almost dark. From there, He had to hire a local man to take him by motorbike for nearly 2 more hours along a dirt road littered with rough stones. With a cliff wall on one side and a chasm erased by fog on the other. The man said little, his back hunched, an old frayed cap on his head, and every time Min tried to ask about Blind Village, he only grunted or fell silent. When they reached the turnoff onto a narrow path cutting through the forest, the man stopped the bike. "Keep going in and you'll reach the village," he said. "Why not take me all the way in?" The man looked at the leaf-covered road ahead, and his face darkened. "I don't go in after sunset. It's only a little farther. Walk, just over a kilometer." Min laughed, trying to shake off the strange atmosphere thickening around him. "What's in there? Tigers or ghosts?" The man did not laugh. He reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out a worn red string, and quickly tied it to Min's backpack strap. "Don't take it off. And remember carefully, if they tell you not to do something, listen, especially if they tell you not to touch anything. Then don't touch it." With that, he turned the bike around and left without looking back. Min stood alone on the forest road as it slowly sank into fog. The moment the engine died, the space around him thickened with an abnormal kind of silence. It was not the ordinary stillness of the mountains and woods, where insects, evening birds, and rustling leaves still remained. Here, the silence had weight. It pressed against the eardrums, blocking all sound, making each footstep on the layer of rotting leaves seem unnaturally loud. He walked for nearly 20 minutes before he saw the village. The low wooden houses emerged behind the white mist like dark stains blurred by water. No dogs barked, no children played, no cooking smoke rose the way it did in other mountain hamlets. The whole village stood motionless, like a place long abandoned that somehow still had people living inside it. The first person Min saw was an old woman sitting on a porch picking greens into a bamboo basket. She lifted her eyes and looked at him. Only looked. She did not ask who he was, where he had come from, or what he wanted. Her gaze made Min feel he was not the first outsider to enter the village with curiosity bright in his eyes. He greeted her. She did not answer. Min went deeper into the village. A few doors opened slightly, then closed again. Faces appeared behind cracks in the wood, silently watching him. At the end of the main path stood a stilt house larger than the others. In front of it hung a cluster of bronze bells gone green with corrosion. An old man with white hair, thin as a stick, stood waiting on the steps as though he had known Min would come. "You're from the lowlands?" he asked. Min nodded, quickly introducing himself and saying he had heard there was something strange here and wanted to investigate it. And if possible, stay one night. The old man looked at Min for a very long time. His gaze was not exactly hostile, but it was not friendly either. It was the gaze of someone standing on the edge of a bank, watching another man about to step down into a very deep well. "I am Luong, the village head. You may stay." He paused, lips pressed into a thin line. "But there are rules here. If we tell you something, you obey, especially about the place at the end of the village." "The stone shrine?" The moment those two words left Min's mouth, the old man's face twitched. "You already know, yet you still came." He stepped backward into the house and signaled for Min to follow. "Then I will say this only once. You may look, You may stand at a distance and look. You may take photographs if you want. But do not touch the statue in the shrine. Not even with the tip of your finger. Min smiled as politely as he could. Yes, I understand. Old Luong turned sharply. In the dim light of the wooden house, those aged eyes suddenly sharpened like blades. No, you don't understand. If you did, you would not have come. The sentence made Min falter slightly. But habit made him hide it behind calmness. After a dinner in which almost no one spoke except for the dry clink of bowls and chopsticks, Min was given a small room against the wall to sleep in. Night fell very quickly over Blind Village. It had barely begun to darken, and already the fog had risen to the windowsill, white and opaque outside the wooden frame. In the room, Min switched on his flashlight and checked his camera, his phone, and his notebook. There was no phone signal at all. The digital watch on his wrist suddenly flickered and died. He had to remove it and tap it a few times before it lit up again. But only for a moment before going dark once more. Near midnight, as he drifted in and out of sleep, Min heard a bell. Not loud, just a very faint ring, as though someone outside on the porch had lightly touched the cluster of bronze bells with a fingernail. Came. Then silence. A while later, another ring. Came. Min sat up, listening. The house was utterly still. No sound of someone turning in sleep. No footsteps. Only the solitary bell sounding at long intervals, as though testing whether anyone inside was still awake. He was about to open the room door when he suddenly remembered the look in old Luong's eyes before dinner. The memory made him stop. He stood motionless for a few seconds. Then instead of going out, he pressed his eye to the crack in the door. Outside, the corridor was dim. The moonlight filtered by the fog became a pale, cloudy glow. Min saw a woman standing in the yard, her back turned to the house. Her hair was very long, falling to her waist, and her white clothes hung down as though soaked through with water. Her right arm was raised, her hand resting lightly on the cluster of bronze bells. Came. The bell rang again. Min held his breath. A dozen explanations immediately flashed through his mind. Someone from the village? A madwoman? A staged trick to frighten a guest? Then the woman slowly tilted her head to one side. She did not turn around. She only tilted her neck at an angle far beyond anything normal. As though the bones in her throat had gone soft. Her hair slid aside, exposing half of a deathly pale cheek. Even from that distance, Min had the distinct feeling that she knew perfectly well he was watching through the crack. He stepped back sharply. At that exact moment, old Luong's voice came from somewhere in the house. Very soft but hard as stone. Don't look too long. Min froze. He did not know whether the old man was speaking to him, or to the thing in the yard. The next morning, when he went outside and asked, no one admitted to having stood in the yard the night before. Old Luong only told Min to eat breakfast and leave the village before the evening fog descended. The more the man repeated that he should leave, the more Min's defiant pride rose. He was used to places like this. The harder people tried to hide something, the more valuable the story inside usually was. And as always, he believed that if he stayed just a little more clear-headed, a little more careful, he could still reach the truth without paying for it. Around noon, Min asked permission to walk around the village and take some pictures. No one stopped him, but he noticed that there were always eyes following him from behind the walls. At the end of the village was a narrow dirt path, grass on both sides growing above his knees. At the end of that path was an open patch of land, and in the middle of it stood the shrine. It was smaller than Min had imagined, but far heavier in presence. The shrine was built from black stone slabs fitted together, the outer walls covered in cracks as though they had once been scorched by fire and then worn down by rain and wind for centuries. In front of the door hung countless faded talisman cords, wind chimes made from bird bones, bundles of dried leaves, and dozens of red strings bleached pale with age. On the threshold were old wax drippings hardened into lines, mixed with something darker, as if blood had sunk into the stone and dried there. The shrine door was not closed. It was only slightly ajar, revealing a slit of darkness inside. Min raised his camera and took a picture. The screen showed nothing unusual. An old shrine, dim light, nothing strange except for the inexplicable cold despite the middle of the day. He stepped onto the first stone stair and heard a voice behind him. "Don't go too close." Min turned around. The old woman who had been picking greens yesterday was standing at the end of the grassy path. He had no idea when she had arrived. There was no wind, but the dark indigo hem of her blouse shifted faintly as though stirred by some hidden current. "I'm only taking pictures." The old woman looked straight at him. "That's what all the first ones said." "What kind of statue is it? Grandmother?" She was silent for a long time before answering, her voice rough like stone grinding against stone. "No one remembers its true name anymore. Since my great-grandparents' time, the people here have only called it the Stone Mother. But it is not a god, not a Buddha, nor anything human beings should name. Then why not destroy it?" Her lips trembled, as though he had just asked something so foolish it was an offense. "Destroy it? You think the thing people couldn't kill could simply be smashed?" After saying that, she turned away, slowly, like a gray shadow dissolving into the white mist at the end of the path. Min watched until she had fully disappeared, then turned back to the shrine. Inside, a smell of old incense, damp rot, and something strangely rank, like earth freshly dug from a grave, rushed into his throat and made it tighten. It took several seconds for his eyes to adjust to the darkness. The chamber was narrow, its stone walls bare and blotched, the floor etched with repeating circular patterns like a maze. In the center stood a single block of stone serving as an altar. And on the altar, the statue stood there. Min had seen many ancient statues, entered ruined temples and collapsed shrines, and seen all kinds of forms that could make a person shiver. But the moment he saw this one, he understood why the villagers reacted the way they did. The statue was the figure of a woman kneeling, both hands resting on her knees, her head slightly bowed as though listening to a prayer from below. The material was not ordinary gray or black stone but a cloudy pale white, like human bone soaked in water for a long time and then dried. Its entire surface was unnaturally smooth, almost without any mark of chiseling, making it seem less carved than grown into shape. But the most terrifying thing was the face. It was beautiful in a way that should not exist. Soft, balanced features, lips lightly closed as though holding some sweet secret, a delicate nose, long lashes lowered over shut eyes. It was a face that could make someone stare a long time and forget that they were afraid. A complete beauty, untouched by the slightest flaw. And that perfection was what made it horrifying. A real human face always has some asymmetry, some mark of life. Here, everything was smooth, as though built from the deepest hidden desire of whoever looked at it. Min took another step closer. The cold from the stone floor traveled through the soles of his shoes to his knees. He took one photo. On the screen, the statue's eyes were still closed. He took a second. Nothing changed. He shifted angle, stepped a little to the left, and took a third shot. When the image appeared, his heart dropped as though it had fallen out of his chest. In the photograph, the statue's eyes were open. Not wide open, only slightly parted, just enough to reveal a narrow black line like a knife cut across a white surface. But Min knew for certain that in front of him, those eyes were still shut. He lowered the camera and looked up at the statue. Eyes shut. He looked back at the screen. Eyes open. A thin coldness like a blade ran down his spine. Min instinctively stepped back half a pace. But the emotion that seized him was not entirely fear. It was also the wild excitement of a hunter of strange stories who had just scented something truly unexplainable. His hand trembled slightly, but he kept taking pictures. In the fourth shot, the statue's lips had curved upward. In the fifth, its head was raised a little more than before. In the sixth, in the picture, the statue was looking directly at the camera. Min swore under his breath and turned off the screen. The shrine chamber was dead silent. He could hear his own heart beating in his ears. Several seconds passed, and nothing happened. The statue remained motionless. Its eyes stayed shut. The smile was still only a faint, harmless curve on its lips. An illusion, Min said aloud, trying to steady his breathing. Weak light, camera glitch, or I'm just tense. But the moment the words left his mouth, a very soft sound echoed through the shrine. Tap. Like a fingernail knocking against stone. Min went rigid. He looked around. No one. The sound came again. Tap. This time clearer. It came not from the wall or floor. It came from in front of him. From the statue. Min did not understand why he did not run at once. Perhaps human beings always have one brief idiotic second before real danger. The second when reason is twisted by curiosity, making us want to see more clearly instead of flee. He stepped closer. The statue's right hand rested on its knee, with the tip of the index finger extending slightly more than the others. The pale stone nail had been polished smooth. That was where the knocking had come from. Tap. Another knock. As though the stone fingertip had just lifted from the surface of the altar. Then touched down again. Min recoiled, cold sweat breaking across his back though the air inside the shrine was freezing. Then a voice spoke. It did not enter through the ears. It slid directly into his head. Thin, gentle, and very near. Gentle enough to sound like a lover whispering against the nape of his neck at midnight. At last, someone willing to stand close to me. Min opened his mouth, but his throat locked shut. Don't be afraid, the voice continued, soft as wet silk. I have waited a very long time. Min stepped back again, his heel catching the edge of one of the carved grooves in the floor and making him stumble. His camera nearly fell from his hand. He forced himself to turn away. But strangely, his legs would not obey. His calves stiffened as though nailed to the stone. The statue's eyes were still shut. But Min knew it was looking at him. "You came from far away," the voice said. "You want to know the truth." A very strange fragrance slowly spread through the chamber. At first it was like white flowers blooming at night. Then it became the smell of a woman's wet hair, of human skin fresh from bathing. Then mixed with the smell of grave earth, mold, and old remains. Each time Min inhaled, he had the feeling he was smelling life and decay at once. "You look at me without kneeling." The voice carried a hint of laughter. "You are braver than the others." What the hell?" Min whispered. "Touch me." The final two words were spoken so softly. Yet they hooked into the center of his forehead like iron. Min felt his right arm grow heavy. Then unnaturally light. The muscles from shoulder to hand tingled as though sensation were draining out of them. His fingertips began to lift slightly, as if some invisible string tied to his wrist were pulling his arm forward. Min clenched his teeth and used his left hand to hold his right wrist down. Sweat broke out across his forehead. Never in his life had he had to struggle against his own body in so strange a way. His right hand shook violently, trying to slip free and reach out. "Just one touch," the voice went on, soft to the point of sweetness, "and you will see things the living have never seen." Min shouted and jerked himself backward with all his strength. The violent movement sent him crashing onto the stone floor. The pain in his back dragged him back to reality for one brief moment. He scrambled upright and ran for the shrine door. Just before stepping over the threshold, he could not stop himself from turning his head back. The statue's eyes were still shut. But on those pale lips, the smile had widened. That afternoon Min returned to old Luong's house in a half-conscious daze. He did not tell everything he had seen. He only said the camera had problems and that the shrine made him uncomfortable. Old Luong listened without asking more. He only stared at Min's right hand. "Did you touch it?" "No." "Are you sure?" Min nodded. The old man looked for a long time, as though trying to see through every vein in his skin. At last he turned and told a young woman to bring Min a bowl of some bitter leaf brew. "Tonight, keep your door shut, no matter what you hear. Don't go outside, no matter who calls your name. Don't answer. Remember that well." Min had not intended to believe those instructions completely. But from the moment evening began to fall, there was already something wrong with his body. His right hand was far colder than his left. Not cold on the surface, but a cold deep in the bone, as though the joints of his fingers had been soaked in ice water too long. When he looked closely under the oil lamp, he saw that the tips of his fingers had grown slightly pale. An abnormal whitish gray. He rubbed them, squeezed them hard, even held them near the flame. But it did no good. The numb stiffness remained there. Night fell completely. Once again, the bell rang outside in the yard. Kane. This time Min did not go to the crack in the door. He sat on the bed, his back against the wall, his eyes fixed on the room door. The bell rang sparsely for a long while. Then, among those sounds, came the sound of bare footsteps on the wooden floor outside in the corridor. Slow, light, unhurried, the footsteps stopped right in front of his door. Someone was standing outside. Min held his breath. 3 very soft knocks sounded on the door. Knock, knock, knock. Min. A woman's voice. Gentle, slightly sorrowful. So familiar that a wave of ice ran from the nape of his neck to his feet. It was Lee's voice, his ex-girlfriend, who had died 2 years earlier in a traffic accident on the expressway. Min felt as though his heart had stopped. Min, open the door. The voice outside was soft to the point of heartbreak. Exactly like the final missed calls he had once ignored. Exactly like the way Lee used to draw out his name whenever she was angry but no longer wanted to argue. Impossible. Min clenched both hands. The nails of his left hand dug deep into his right palm. But he could barely feel pain in that freezing hand. I'm so cold, the voice outside trembled. Let me in. A rank smell of rainwater seeped through the crack under the door. Min gritted his teeth, sweat soaking the back of his neck. He knew Lee was dead. He had seen her body covered with a white sheet in the morgue. But that voice, it was too real. Too exact. Exact even in the way the breath broke. Knock, knock, knock. Min. The voice changed, from gentle to coaxing, then slowly stretching out like a dull blade dragged across skin. Look at me. Instinct urged him to run over. Yank the door open, just to see what stood outside. But then he remembered old Luong's warning. No matter who calls your name, don't answer. He sat motionless. The knocking stopped. The silence lasted so long that Min thought perhaps the thing had gone. Then, from the other side of the door, came a soft scratching sound. Scratch. Like long nails dragging across wood. Scratch. 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 The sound slowly slid lower. Lower, as though whatever was outside was no longer standing but kneeling, pressing its face down near the bottom of the door. Then one eye looked through the gap beneath it. Min did not know how he saw it in that thick darkness. But he saw it very clearly, a cloudy white eyeball. The pupil dilated wide, lying sideways against the floor. Unblinking, it did not look like the eye of a person standing or sitting. It looked like a head bent sideways all the way to the ground, forced down to peer through the gap. Min sprang up and backed into the farthest corner of the room. Slamming into the wall, the eye outside kept staring at him. Then, on the other side of the gap, a smile began to appear. Pale, wet lips stretching horizontally in a way no human mouth should. You have already stood near me. The voice in his head returned, this time no longer gentle but carrying a tone of grotesque amusement. Did you think you could still leave? Min could not remember how long he stayed awake. There were moments he thought he had fainted and then woke again to the sound of knocking. Bells, scratching. Only when the first dim light of dawn seeped through the wall cracks did all the sounds finally vanish. When old Luong opened his door, the old man looked at Min for a long moment and silently set down a bowl of black liquid. Thick as medicine. Drink. What was that outside my door last night? Min asked, his voice hoarse. Old Luong did not answer directly. It was only testing how weak you are. It is what? The thing in the shrine. Is it a ghost? Or what? Old Luong sat down across from him. The deep wrinkles in the old man's face seemed even harsher in the wan daylight. Our ancestors told us that long ago there was no village here. Only forest and a white stone field on the mountainside. Then a group of people fleeing war stopped here. They built huts, cleared fields, raised animals. Everything was peaceful until a child disappeared. People searched the whole forest and finally found the child standing naked in the stone field, facing the cliff. When the father came to embrace him, the boy turned his head. His face was no longer his own. The old man stopped, as though he had to spend all his strength to continue. It looked like the face of his dead mother, but not in the way a child resembles a parent. It looked as though that face had been peeled off and fitted over the boy's head. The boy smiled and asked his father, "Am I beautiful?" That night, the whole family died. One by one they clawed their own faces open until they died. After that, anyone who stepped into the stone field was marked by something. Some went mad because every night they heard dead relatives calling their names. Some saw other versions of themselves standing in the forest looking out. Some woke to find their hands turning to stone. Min dropped his gaze sharply to his right hand. The tips of his fingers were much whiter than yesterday. Not only white, but glossy, dull, like porcelain. When he pressed hard on them with his left fingers, he felt only a vague pressure, almost no pain. Old Luong followed his gaze and said very slowly, "The thing in the shrine does not hunt people by killing them. It replaces. It takes what human beings believe matters most, the face, the voice, the memory, the shape. It begins with one touch. After that, the body stiffens piece by piece. But what is more horrifying is that before they turn completely to stone, the person is still alive, still sees, still hears, still knows. Only they cannot stop the other thing from gradually dressing itself in them." Min felt his throat go dry. "So, the statues in the shrine are people," Old Luong answered. "All of them were once people." An image flashed through Min's mind. A male statue with its mouth open as if screaming, which he had vaguely noticed in a shadowed corner yesterday. At the time he had thought it was just a broken stone mass. A cold current shot down his spine. "I will ask you again," Old Luong said. "Did you touch it?" "No," Min replied at once. Then, as if afraid he himself was no longer certain, he added, "I don't think so." The old man closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. "Then it has touched you by some other way." The second day in Blind Village passed in a heavy, sluggish state, like a bad dream stretched too long. Min was not lucid enough to go far, but he could not stay still either. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the pale face of the statue rising behind his eyelids. Not standing still like an inert statue, but tilting its head, smiling at him with a gentleness so repulsive it seemed genuinely sorry for his fate. Then, in the late afternoon, something else happened. Min went to the well to wash his face. The water in the well lay flat like a sheet of black glass. He bent down, scooped a ladleful, but when he glanced into the water, his hand stopped. The reflection in the well was not entirely him. More precisely, for one brief instant, his reflected face became smoother, paler, his lips slightly darker, the corners of the eyes seemed longer. And just before he jerked in alarm and made the water ripple, that reflected image smiled half a beat before he did. Min dropped the ladle. The sound made a little girl nearby turn around. She looked at him. then down into the well. Her expression changed instantly. Without saying a word, she ran as fast as she could into the house. That evening, Min heard the villagers arguing in the main room. A woman's voice, tight with fear. "Don't let him stay here any longer." Another man's voice snapped back. "Throwing him out now is the same as offering him to that thing." Finally old Luong's voice cut through. Short and heavy as falling stone. "Enough. Not yet." Min sat in his room listening. And his heart sank. He understood that, to them, he was no longer a guest. He had become something in between. Not fully human, but not yet completely the thing in the shrine. A contamination. A door beginning to open. The second night was worse than the first. This time there were no bells. The whole house sank into silence for so long that Min drifted off without knowing it. He woke to the sensation of someone stroking his hair. That hand was very cold. Min opened his eyes. A woman was sitting on the edge of his bed. Long hair hung down, covering almost all of her face. Her white robe was drenched, clinging to a thin body. Water dripped from its hem onto the wooden floor. But the most horrifying thing was the hand resting on his forehead, a hand white as chalk. Smooth and hard, without the softness of human flesh. A stone hand. Min screamed and threw himself backward. The woman did not flinch. She slowly lifted the hair from her face. The face beneath that hair turned the blood in Min's body to ice. It was his face. Not merely similar. It was his own face. But slightly longer in the chin. Whiter. Lips too red. And the eyes had no pupils at all. Only two cloudy white surfaces reflecting the weak light. "It is learning very quickly." The voice in his head said. Delighted like a child. "Did you think your face belonged to you?" The thing sitting on the bed tilted its head and smiled. The movement was too fluid. Its neck nearly folding onto its shoulder. "Don't be afraid," it said in Min's own voice. "I will do better than you." Min grabbed the oil lamp and hurled it straight at it. Flame burst up with the sound of shattering glass. The room flared bright for an instant. When people kicked the door open and rushed in, there was no one on the bed. Only the blanket, wet and cold as if it had been soaked in stream water. And on the wooden edge of the cot, 5 pale gray handprints like stone dust. The next morning old Luong decided to take Min to the only person left in the village who still remembered the full story of the thing in the shrine. A blind old woman living apart at the edge of the forest. Named Nhu. Nhu's house was low, dark, and thick with the smell of smoked herbs. She sat beside a fire almost gone out. Her eyes milky white, without pupils. Though blind, she turned exactly toward Min the moment he stepped through the door. "It has smelled you already," she said at once, her voice as thin as wind through a rock crack. The smell of young stone. The smell of a half-peeled face. Min felt his stomach twist. Old Luong briefly told her what had happened. Nhu listened, 2 shriveled fingers tapping her knee in a strange rhythm. As if counting. "When I was young I could still see," she said. "I was the one who watched it take the first person in my life. He was my younger brother. He also thought it was just a stone statue. He touched its cheek and laughed that it was cold. 3 days later, his fingers stiffened. 7 days later, his voice was no longer right. Sometimes he would sit in the yard laughing to himself in a woman's voice. On the 10th day, my mother saw him looking at his face in a basin of water and using a knife to shave the skin off his cheek. Because he said his face was too old now. That night we tied him up. In the morning, the ropes were still there. But the thing lying on the bed wore my brother's face. And my brother was standing in the shrine. Min felt each word driving into his skull like nails. "Is there any way to save me?" he asked. The question had barely left his mouth before he realized how desperate he sounded. Nhu was silent for a very long time. The fire crackled softly once. Outside the door, the mist was so thick that daylight could not enter. "There is," she said at last, "but not everyone dares." Min jerked his head up. "It lives on the desire to look, the desire to touch, the desire to keep one's face beautiful and intact forever. The shrine is only a cage. Its true anchor lies in an old object buried beneath the statue base. Our ancestors could not destroy the stone body, so they bound it with iron spikes. Hair, blood, bells, and curses. If you want to cut off the road it is using to crawl into you, you must open the base, take out that object, burn it with fire taken from the founding ancestor's grave at the head of the village, and blindfold yourself while doing it. Do not look directly at its face. Do not listen when it calls your name. Do not let skin touch skin. Not even once." "What is that object?" Nhu shook her head. No one remembers exactly anymore. Only that it was the first thing it attached itself to when it came to this place. It could be a comb. It could be a shard of mirror. It could be part of a human body. A chill spread through Min's spine. "And if I don't do it? You will stiffen from the hand to the shoulder, from the face to the heart." She turned her blind face toward him. "Then one night, the people in the village will hear you knocking on doors in the voice of the one they loved most." On the way back, Min could no longer maintain the cold, self-assured calm with which he had kept steady until then. His right hand had now almost entirely lost feeling from the fingertips to half the palm. The skin there had turned chalk white and faint patterns like stone grain had begun to appear. Every time he clenched his hand, the finger joints made tiny clicking sounds. But what frightened him more was that his memory was beginning to slip in places. That afternoon, when he looked into the small mirror hanging in the main room, for 1 second he did not recognize the person inside it as himself. Not because the image had changed too much, but because a strange feeling rose in him. That face looked unfinished. As though somewhere inside his mind there existed another version. Truer, more beautiful, smoother, slowly layering itself over the old features. He recoiled in horror from the thought that had just arisen in him. That evening, Min told old Luong that he would go down to the shrine with him that very night. At first the old man refused. But when Min raised his chalk-white hand and the fingers made a dry sound like porcelain striking together, old Luong could only turn his face away. "If we do it, we must do it before midnight," he said. "After that, it is strongest." They prepared in silence, like men about to do something that everyone knew might leave no one alive. Old Luong carried a bundle of torches soaked in pine resin, an old dagger wrapped in red cloth, a pouch of black nails, a fresh spool of red string, a small bronze bell, and a jar of earth taken from the founding ancestor's grave at the head of the village. Nhu did not come. But before they left the house, she seized Min's left wrist and whispered, "No matter who you hear crying, don't turn around, even if you see your own face somewhere. Don't look too long. What it fears most is not fire. It is the one who knows it is beautiful and still refuses it." The road to the shrine that night was many times longer than in daylight. Thick fog coiled around their legs like strips of wet cloth. The torch lit only a few meters before the light was swallowed up. With every step, Min felt that beyond the ring of light many shadowy figures were walking alongside them, only waiting for him to glance sideways so they could show their faces. When they reached the patch of land before the shrine, both men stopped. The stone door, which had once only stood slightly ajar, was now wide open. Inside was blackness, deep and hollow like the throat of an animal. The bone wind chimes hanging before the entrance clicked softly against each other without wind, like chattering teeth. Old Luong handed Min a strip of black cloth. "Cover your lower face. It dulls the smell and the hearing." Then he looked straight at him. "From now on, if something wearing my face speaks to you, don't believe it immediately." Min nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. They stepped inside. The air in the shrine at night was utterly different from during the day. It was dense and cold like water used to soak a corpse. The yellow torchlight flickered and threw long distorted shadows across the walls. Only then did Min clearly see the statues arranged in the corners, not one, but 7 men, women, even one the size of a child. All of them bore the same expression from that final instant when a human being realized they no longer belonged to themselves. Terror. Pleading. Faces warped by despair. One statue had a sunken cheek as though someone had peeled away the flesh before it turned to stone. Another had both hands pressed before its chest, fingers bent inward like claws trying to tear something off its own face. Min had to clench his teeth not to vomit. The woman's statue in the center of the altar remained there. White, smooth, silent, beautiful beyond reason, but under the trembling torchlight, that beauty seemed even more lustful and cruel, as though if one looked at it a few seconds too long, an unnamed urge would rise in the mind, to touch it, to run a hand across that face, to test with one's own skin whether that impossible perfection was real. Blindfolded, old Luong whispered. According to news instructions, they were not allowed to look directly at it when opening the base. Old Luong tied a strip of red cloth across the statue's face, covering its shut eyes. The instant the cloth touched the statue's brow, a soft hissing sound filled the shrine, like dozens of people inhaling all at once. The torch flame lurched violently. Then laughter rang out. Not one voice, but many layered together. Men, women, old, young, they laughed from within the walls, beneath the floor, behind their necks, inside their skulls. "You think that is enough?" The voice flooded up and made Min dizzy. He and old Luong knelt beside the altar and began using the dagger to pry up the sealed stone at the base. The stone was not as hard as Min had expected. In places it was soft and crumbly, as though mixed from ash, blood, and ground bone. Each time the blade sank in, thick black liquid seeped from the cracks, reeking horribly. Behind them, someone softly called out, "Father!" A child's voice. Old Luong froze for exactly one beat. Min saw the corner of the old man's face twitch. But he kept working, not turning around. "Father, I'm cold." The voice came closer. Little by little, Min knew it was not calling him. But merely hearing it made his scalp crawl. Then he heard his own. "Min. Lee." Her voice was so clear it seemed she was leaning right over his shoulder. "Don't do this anymore. I'm here. Don't listen." Old Luong hissed through clenched teeth. Min kept digging. His right hand was so numb it almost moved by itself. Chunks of ceiling stone gave way. Underneath them, a hollow cavity appeared. At that exact moment, the red cloth over the statue's eyes slipped down slightly. Just enough to reveal one eye. That stone eye was open. Min saw it only for an instant. But that was enough. All sound around him collapsed. He fell into a thick darkness in which only his own face floated before him. Then that face cracked like old paint and slid off the skull, revealing beneath it another face. Smooth, pale, perfect, smiling gently. "You are tired of being yourself," the voice whispered. "Give me the rest." Min's right arm jerked violently, shooting straight toward the statue. Old Luong lunged and pinned it down. The two men grappled on the slick stone floor. In the struggle, Min's half-stoned hand brushed the statue's cheek. Just one very light touch. But enough. A sharp cracking sound burst from his right shoulder. Min screamed. The pain was unlike the pain of flesh and skin. It was as though his bones had been packed full of splintered ice and forced to expand from within. The pale gray streak shot from his wrist up his forearm so fast it was visible to the eye. "Pull out whatever's in the hollow," Old Luong shouted. Half mad with pain, Min thrust his left hand into the cavity beneath the base. His fingers touched something small, slick, and cold. He yanked it out. It was an oval mirror shard about the size of his palm. Its surface was black like stagnant water. Its metal frame corroded green. But what made Min want to fling it away at once was the reflection upon it. Not his own face, but the statue's face, looking up from inside the mirror with open eyes. It smiled. The entire shrine shook. The statues in the four corners all gave off dry cracking sounds like breaking bones. Their stone lips slowly parted. From deep within their stone throats came moans, faint but full of consciousness, like the voices of people buried alive too long who had finally found their tongues again. Old Luong snatched the jar of ancestor grave soil and poured it straight over the mirror shard. Then wound red string around it. Torch. Min thrust the torch forward. But just as the flame neared, the mirror suddenly lit up. It was no longer black. It turned into a clear pool of water. Inside it appeared Lee, whole and alive as on the day she had lived. She was crying, eyes red, her hand pressed against the surface from the inside. "Min, don't," she sobbed. "That's me. I'm here." Min's heart clenched. The pain in his arm, the smell of blood, the moaning from the shrine, everything wavered before that image. A part of him knew it was false. But another part, the softest and most guilt-ridden part, had been waiting for one chance to see Lee again for 2 full years. "Look closely," the sweet voice murmured in his head. "You only need to let me out. I will give everything back." The torch flame trembled just before the mirror. Min remained still. And then he noticed one detail. Lee's hand against the mirror had 5 fingers, but each one was chalk white. Smooth, without fingerprints, a stone hand. Revulsion shattered the trance in an instant. Min roared, snatched the torch bundle from old Luong, and drove it straight into the mirror. A scream exploded through the shrine. Not the scream of one being. The screams of many mouths burning at once. The mirror shard writhed like a living creature, its surface bulging and splitting apart. From the cracks burst strands of wet black hair, twisting like worms in flame, giving off a nauseating burnt stench. The statue on the altar opened both eyes wide. The red cloth hissed, caught fire, and fell away. Those eyes had no pupils, only deep white hollows, but from within them came a stare more terrible than any living gaze. The statue opened its mouth. The stone teeth inside were packed tight like real human teeth. I am more beautiful than all of you. That scream froze Min's blood. The roof of the shrine cracked overhead. The statues in the corners all collapsed at once. And then before Min's eyes, an impossible thing happened. The stone shells around their bodies began to split and peel away like cracked cocoons. Beneath them appeared blackened dried flesh, tangled hair, bone, and eyes that were still wet, still alive, rolling wildly in pain stretched across decades. Old Luong hurled the bronze bell onto the floor and rang it frantically, chanting a stream of ancient words Min did not understand. Min clutched the burning mirror shard like a piece of living coal and ran for the door. Behind him, pounding footsteps erupted on the stone floor. Not the steps of one person. Many, distorted, dragging, staggering footsteps of things that had just escaped the posture of statues and were remembering how to hunt. Outside the shrine they plunged into the dense fog. The mirror shard burned so hot it seared the flesh of Min's left hand. But he dared not let go. Behind them, in the white mist, dozens of shapes flickered. Some wore Min's face, some wore Lee's face, some were anonymous smooth white faces like statue stone. Their necks tilted sideways, their feet not touching the ground. To the ancestor grave, old Luong shouted. They ran uphill to the cemetery. The founding ancestor's grave at the head of the village was a large mound ringed with stones, with a charred wooden stake planted in the center. Old Luong grabbed the last of the resin bundle, fed the fire, and pushed Min down to his knees beside the grave. Smash it against the stake. Min swung the burning mirror shard against the wooden stake. The first blow only cracked it further. On the second, a slender female hand suddenly shot out from inside the mirror and seized his wrist. The sensation of stone-cold hardness pierced straight into his bones. The pale streak in his right arm suddenly shot across into his left shoulder. Min screamed and with all the strength he had left struck a third time. The mirror shattered. A violent wind, unlike anything before, swept across the hilltop. The white fog was torn apart. From all over the village came the sound of bronze bells ringing wildly, as though every cluster of bells in every house had begun to shake at once without any hand touching them. And then, silence fell. This silence was different from the suffocating stillness Blind Village had held before. It was lighter, emptier, as though a poisoned breath had been pulled out of the village's lungs. Min collapsed. His right arm had stiffened all the way to the shoulder. The left side of his neck had also gone freezing numb, and his jaw had lost feeling. He did not know how much of him was still human. Down below at the foot of the hill, the stone shrine gave off one deep crashing sound. Then nothing. Min woke 2 days later. He was lying in the same small room in old Luong's house. Daylight entered more clearly than before, no longer clouded thickly by fog. When he tried to sit up, he realized his right arm was terribly heavy. Looking down, he saw that from fingertips to beyond the elbow, the entire arm had become a solid white-gray mass, dull and hard as real stone. But the spreading had stopped at the upper arm. It had gone no farther. Old Luong told him he was alive only by a kind of luck no one would have dared imagine. The shrine had half collapsed. The central statue was split open from face to abdomen. The remaining statues had shattered into pieces. From the rubble, they found human bones, hair, a few very old bits of jewelry, and lengths of rotted red string. No one found anything intact that still held a human shape. The villagers did not thank Min, nor did they suddenly grow warm toward him. Fear held too long cannot vanish after one night. But the way they looked at him had changed, less wary, and edged with pity. 3 days later, Min left Blind Village. Before he went, Nhu called him over and placed a small bronze bell in his left hand. Carry it with you, not to ward it off. But if someday you hear the bell ring by itself when no one has touched it, then stop looking in mirrors. Min asked what she meant, but she did not answer. When he returned to Hanoi, he did not write any article about Blind Village. Whenever anyone asked, he only said the trip had failed, the camera had malfunctioned, and all the material had been lost. In truth, the memory card still remained, but every photograph taken inside the shrine had turned into nothing but glaring white fields with a single black mark at the center. Like a pupil dilating, Min went on living, learning how to do everything with one arm that was almost useless. He wrapped cloth gloves around the stone arm and lied that he had suffered severe burns in an accident. For the first few months, everything seemed as though it had truly ended. He could sleep again. He no longer heard knocking at the door, no longer saw Lee standing at the foot of the bed, no longer smelled grave earth seeping through the cracks at night. Until one late autumn evening, Min was brushing his teeth when he absent-mindedly looked up into the bathroom mirror. In the mirror, he was still himself. His face had grown thinner, his eyes hollow from prolonged sleeplessness. Nothing unusual. He lowered his head to rinse his mouth, but just before switching off the light, he glanced up one more time. The reflection smiled, and he did not. Min froze solid. The smile in the mirror spread wider. The corners of the mouth lifted in that same familiar gentle way. Then the reflected face began to smooth itself out little by little. The skin growing whiter, the eyes longer, more beautiful, and more wrong. It tilted its head, exactly in that impossible way of the thing outside his door that night years before. The small bronze bell in the pocket of his coat in the living room suddenly gave one very faint ring. Kang. Min smashed the mirror that night. The next morning, he found on the sink one remaining shard no bigger than a coin. In that fragment, it reflected neither the ceiling nor his fingers holding it. There was only one cloudy white eye, open, From then on, Min never dared look into mirrors again. He pasted paper over every reflective surface in the house. He avoided looking at his phone screen late at night. He never bent over still water. He learned to shave by touch with his left hand. And sometimes, on the worst sleepless nights, when the entire room sank into darkness, he would hear from some corner a whisper soft as wet hair sliding across skin. "I have not taken everything from you yet." Some mornings he woke to find a long black hair lying on his pillow, damp and cold as if pulled from the bottom of a well. Sometimes when he passed the glass walls of buildings, he felt his shadow walk half a beat slower than he did. And most terrifying of all, his stone hand sometimes twitched lightly in his sleep, the fingers tapping against the bed frame in a tiny, steady sound. Tap, tap, tap. Exactly like the first sound he had heard in the stone shrine at the end of Blind Village. Min never returned there. Old Luong died 2 years after that journey. Nhu died not long before him. Fewer and fewer people from Blind Village came down to the lowlands. Some said the village was slowly emptying out. Some said the mist there had thinned. But forest wanderers still claimed that on nights when rain whitened the mountains, if someone got lost near the plot at the end of the village, they could see in the ruins of the collapsed shrine a figure sitting upright, motionless in the rain. No one dared go close enough to look clearly. Min does not know whether the thing in the shrine was completely destroyed or not. He only knows it once attached itself to a mirror shard, once wore the voices of the dead, once slid through the deepest hidden desires of human beings in order to enter. And he knows one truth even more frightening than everything his own eyes have seen. There are doors that do not open by hand. They open through looking, through curiosity, through that moment when a human being stands before a warning and thinks they will be the exception. If one day you pass an old shrine, a deserted room of worship, an antique exhibit, or simply a dusty corner of someone's house where a statue has been placed, and you hear someone say very softly, very casually, "You may look, don't touch," then believe them. Do not laugh. Do not test it. Do not reach your hand out, even just to prove you are not afraid. Because it may be that the thing sitting motionless there has been waiting for exactly that moment for a very long time. Waiting for living human skin to touch its cold surface. Waiting for a new face to wear. Waiting for a new voice with which to call the others in the night. And once it has learned your face, your voice, your pain, and the deepest regrets hidden in your heart, then even if you escape that place, even if the shrine collapses, even if the mirror shard is shattered, you will never again know for certain what is looking at you in the dark. Whether it is you, or it, until one night, inside a locked house, with no wind, no one but you, a small bell suddenly rings. Kane. And from the dark glass of the window, a pale smooth hand slowly presses out from the other side.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.